My name is Eleanor Vance. I'm 48 years old, and I sat in a courtroom while my husband of 20 years offered me a pittance for a divorce settlement, smirking as he called my life's work a little hobby. What he didn't know was that my little hobby had just been valued at $80 million. It's a long story, but it's a true one. I'm telling it today because I know I'm not the only one who has ever felt invisible, whose contributions have been minimized until they almost disappear. I'd love to know who's reading this and where you are in the world. Drop a comment and let me know what country you're in and what time it is there. It makes me feel a little less alone, knowing we're all connected by more than just the internet. Now, let me take you back to that courtroom, to the day my old life ended and my new one truly began. The air in the courtroom was stale, thick with the ghosts of 1,000 other broken promises. It smelled of old paper, cheap coffee, and the faint, cloying scent of the lemon polish they used on the wooden benches, a scent that would forever be linked in my memory to the end of my marriage. I sat perfectly still, my back straight, my hands resting on the handle of a finely crafted leather briefcase in my lap. It was one of my own designs, the very first prototype, a silent statement only I understood, a piece of armor he would never recognize. Across the room, my husband, Richard, leaned over to share a laugh with his lawyer, a man named Davies, whose smile was as slick as his perpetually gelled hair. Richard caught my eye and gave me a look that was a practiced blend of pity and condescension. He whispered something to Davies, just loud enough for the sound to carry across the room in a theatrical stage whisper. "Poor little thing, what's she going to do without me?" A year ago, those words would have shattered me into a million pieces. 6 months ago, they would have filled me with a white-hot rage that would have left me shaking. But on that day, sitting on that hard bench that felt designed for discomfort, I felt nothing but a profound, chilling calm. The anger had burned away over long, sleepless nights, leaving behind something harder, something more resilient. It had been forged into focus. When Richard's lawyer, Mr. Davies, stood up to address the judge, his voice oozed a kind of practiced, insincere sympathy that made my skin crawl. "Your Honor," he began, "my client, Mr. Thompson, has always been a generous man. Despite the difficult circumstances of this divorce, he wishes to see Miss Vance, soon to be Ms. Vance again, of course, well taken care of." I had to physically restrain myself from scoffing. Richard's generosity had always been a performance, a tool he used for public admiration. He'd make a grand donation to a charity at a gala, ensuring the photographers got his good side, but would argue for weeks about the cost of a plumber for our leaking faucet. Therefore, Davies continued, gesturing with a manicured hand as if presenting a grand prize, "Mr. Thompson is prepared to offer Ms. Vance the vacation home in the Catskills, which is already in her name, and a monthly alimony payment of $5,000 for a period of 2 years. We believe this is more than fair considering Ms. Vance has no independent income and has grown accustomed to a certain lifestyle, funded entirely by my client's hard work and success." $5,000 a month. It was a calculated insult, honed to razor's edge. It was less than he spent on his golf club membership, less than the lease on his Porsche. It was a sum designed to keep me comfortable enough not to starve, but poor enough to always remember what I had lost. It was an allowance, not a settlement. It was a final, parting assertion of his control. Richard nodded in solemn agreement with his lawyer's assessment, a mask of magnanimity firmly in place. He was the benevolent king, casting a few coins to a former favorite who had fallen from grace. But as I sat there, I wasn't thinking about the insult. I wasn't feeling the fresh sting of his betrayal. My mind was doing something else entirely. Over the last 2 decades, I had trained myself to suppress my own needs, to analyze his, to anticipate the market, to build strategies for his tech company from the shadows. Now, I was using that same skill on my own life. I was running a final analysis, reviewing the data points that had led me to this very moment. My mind drifted back, not with the hazy fog of nostalgia, but with the sharp clarity of a forensic accountant examining a fraudulent ledger. I saw the evidence, piece by piece, transaction by transaction of my soul. I saw myself at our dining room table 5 years ago, surrounded by market research reports, the glow of the laptop illuminating my face at 3 a.m. Richard's company, Innovatech, was on the verge of losing its biggest client over a flawed product launch. He was panicking, threatening to fire his entire marketing department. I spent a week, sleepless and fueled by coffee, crafting a brilliant new marketing strategy, a complete pivot that focused on B2B partnerships instead of direct-to-consumer sales. It would not only save the account, but open up an entirely new, more stable revenue stream. I handed him the 40-page presentation, complete with charts and projections. He kissed my forehead. "What would I do without you, Ellie?" he'd said, relief washing over his face. A week later, I sat in the back row of a sterile conference room, a guest, while he stood at the podium and presented my work as his own. When a board member asked about my role, he'd given that familiar, charming laugh. "Oh, Eleanor is my secret weapon. She's the one who keeps the home fires burning so I can go out and slay the dragons." The men in the room chuckled appreciatively. I had felt a familiar sting when I had learned to call pride in his success. I now recognized it as erasure. That was data point number 1. I saw our 10th anniversary. I'd booked a table at the restaurant where he'd proposed, a place we hadn't been in years. I wore the blue dress he used to love. He showed up 2 hours late, smelling of whiskey and victory. He just closed a big deal, a promotion was on the horizon, and he spent the entire dinner talking about his salary, his stock options, his brilliant negotiations. He never once mentioned the occasion. When the waiter brought a small cake with a single candle, a surprise I'd arranged, Richard looked at it confused. "What's this for?" he asked. Data point number 2. The memories weren't painful anymore. They were just facts. They were the foundation upon which I was about to build my case. As Mr. Davies concluded his patronizing speech, I met his gaze. My expression was placid, unreadable. He mistook my silence for weakness. Richard mistook it for defeat. They didn't know that I was no longer the woman from those memories. I was no longer keeping the home fires burning. I had built a new fire, an inferno, and they were all about to get burned. The event that finally shattered the illusion, the one that turned the hairline cracks in our marriage into an unbridgeable canyon, wasn't a public gala or a dramatic confrontation. It was quieter, more intimate, and for that reason, infinitely more brutal. It happened 3 weeks before I finally called a lawyer at Richard's mother's house during her annual family dinner, a tradition I had dutifully upheld for 20 years, a testament to my commitment to a family that was never truly mine. I'd spent the afternoon helping his mother, Carol, in the kitchen. We moved around each other in a familiar, comfortable rhythm born of long practice. I arranged the flowers for the centerpiece. I made sure the wine was chilled. I made my signature dessert, the one Richard always requested. I was, as always, the perfect daughter-in-law, the silent cog that made the family machine run smoothly. Richard arrived late, which was nothing new. But he wasn't alone. Trailing behind him was a young woman, probably half my age, with bright, hungry eyes and a smile that didn't quite reach them. Her name was Chloe. She was wearing a tight red dress that was a size too small, and her hand rested possessively on Richard's arm, her red nails digging slightly into the fabric of his expensive suit. "Everyone, this is Chloe," Richard announced to the room, his voice booming with a false heartiness that set my teeth on edge. "A brilliant new graphic designer at the company, a real rising star." I felt a cold knot form in the pit of my stomach. It wasn't just the way he looked at her, a look of proprietary pride I hadn't seen directed at me in years.
It was the way she looked at our life, her eyes darting around the room, sizing up the antique furniture, the silver candlesticks, the oil paintings, like a property she was about to acquire. It was the casualness of it all. He had brought her here, into this home, into the heart of our family on this night. Carol, his mother, froze for a second, her hand hovering over the gravy boat. She was a woman who valued appearances above all else, and her son was setting a torch to the carefully constructed facade of their perfect family. She recovered quickly, her face hardening into a tight, brittle smile. "How lovely to meet you, dear. Any friend of Richard's is welcome here." The lie was so blatant, it was almost impressive. Richard's sister, Catherine, who had always been kinder and more perceptive, shot me a look of pure, undiluted pity from across the room. I hated that look more than anything. I didn't want her pity. Pity was for victims, and I was done being a victim. We sat down to dinner. The conversation was strained, a collection of empty pleasantries stretched thin over a chasm of unspoken truths. I moved food around on my plate, the taste of ashes in my mouth. Chloe, on the other hand, was holding court. She laughed too loudly at Richard's jokes, her eyes sparkling with ambition. She was playing the part I had retired from, the adoring audience. She asked Richard about his latest promotion, about the new car he was thinking of buying, about every topic that allowed him to pontificate about his own success. The final blow, the one that severed the last thread of hope I didn't even know I was still clinging to, came during dessert. An old family friend of Carol's, a sweet woman named Margaret, who had known me since I first started dating Richard, turned to me. "Eleanor, I haven't seen you in ages. You're looking wonderful. Richard is so lucky to have you. You two have always been such a solid couple." Before I could respond, Richard leaned forward, placing his hand on Chloe's in a gesture of intimate ownership. He gave a dismissive wave in my direction. "Eleanor? Oh, she's an old friend of the family. She's been having a bit of a rough time lately. Her husband left her, you see. A messy divorce." The table fell silent. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, each tick marking a second of my life being publicly dismantled. The air crackled. Every eye was on me. He hadn't just cheated on me. He hadn't just disrespected me. He had erased me. With a few casual words, he had rewritten 20 years of history, demoting me from wife to a pitiful family acquaintance. He had taken my life, my story, and handed it to this young woman sitting beside him who was now looking at me with a triumphant little smirk. In that moment, I saw it all with horrifying clarity. I saw the future he was planning, a future where I was a footnote, a forgotten chapter, a future where he and Chloe would raise their children, perhaps using the college fund we had started together for a child we never had. I saw a future where he'd get another promotion, another bonus, and I would be a distant memory, a sad story he told at dinner parties. Carol stared down at her plate, her knuckles white as she gripped her fork. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Catherine looked like she was about to be sick, but no one said anything. No one corrected him. Their silence was a form of consent. They were letting him do this. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I carefully placed my glass my nose bowl, pushing my chair back from the polished mahogany. The sound of the wood scraping against the floor was unnaturally loud in the silent room. I stood up. I looked directly at Richard, my gaze level and empty of all the love I once had for him. I didn't say goodbye to Carol or Catherine. They were his family, not mine. Not anymore. "Thank you for dinner," I said, my voice even and clear. Then I turned and walked out of the dining room, down the hallway filled with pictures of a life that was no longer mine, and out the front door into the cool night air. I didn't look back. I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that it was the last time I would ever step foot in that house as a member of the family. The life I had known was over. The inheritance of memories and belonging had been revoked. It was a kind of death, a funeral for a life I had thought was mine, and as I walked away, I felt the first stirrings of not grief, but of a cold, liberating fury. The next morning, I was on the first Amtrak train to New York City. I didn't pack a bag. I just took my purse and the car keys and drove to the station, leaving the car, his car, I corrected myself, in the long-term parking lot without a second thought. The motion of the train, the blur of the New England landscape passing by my window was a comfort. It felt like I was finally moving forward after being stuck in place for 2 decades. I went straight to Meredith's apartment in the West Village. Meredith and I had been friends since college, the kind of friend whose couch is always available and whose judgment is never on offer unless you specifically ask for it, and even then, it's brutally honest. She was a textile agent, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who navigated the cutthroat world of fashion with a cynical wit and an artist's eye. She was the only person I knew who had never been impressed by Richard. She'd once called him a charming sociopath with a great stock portfolio. At the time, I'd been offended. Now I saw she'd been generous. When she opened the door, she took one look at my face, my pale skin, the dark circles under my eyes, the rigid set of my jaw, and didn't ask what was wrong. She just said, "I'll put the kettle on. The good whiskey is on the second shelf if you need something stronger." I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I sat at her small kitchen table, a space cluttered with swatches of fabric, colorful spools of thread, and fashion magazines, and I laid out the events of the previous night like a CEO delivering a grim quarterly report. I was detached, analytical, my emotions packed away in a locked box somewhere deep inside me.
So, the emotional assets of the marriage have been fully liquidated, I concluded, my voice flat. Now it's time to rebuild the financial capital. Meredith listened patiently, her chin propped on her hand, her sharp eyes never leaving my face. When I was finished, she didn't offer platitudes or tell me I was better off without him. She was a pragmatist. She looked at me, her gaze sharp and assessing. "Are you sure you can handle this, Ellie?" she asked, her tone serious. "I don't mean the divorce. I mean the fight. The fashion industry is brutal. It's filled with people like Richard, only they're more creative about how they stab you in the back. And Richard, he's not going to just let you walk away and build something for yourself. He's a narcissist. Your success will feel like a personal attack on him. He won't let it happen." "He won't see it coming," I said, a flicker of that cold fury returning. "To him, I'm just a homemaker, a decorator. My work was always just my little hobby." "Okay," Meredith said, nodding slowly. "Okay, so we use that. His blindness is our camouflage." For the next 2 hours, we didn't talk about the pain or the betrayal. We drafted a business plan on the back of a napkin, then on her laptop. We weren't just two friends commiserating. We were two professionals strategizing. Meredith's apartment became our war room. She advised, "You can't go big right away. You need a niche, something high-end, low-volume, high-profit. What's a skill he knows you have but has always belittled?" We brainstormed. "Custom furniture," I suggested. "I redesigned our entire house." "Too slow. Too much overhead," Meredith countered immediately. "Shipping costs would kill you." Next. "Event planning?" I organized all his corporate parties. "Too service-based. You'd be trading one form of servitude for another. You need a product, something that is purely yours, something scalable." My mind immediately went to my old sketchbooks, filled with designs from before I met Richard, before I poured all my creative energy into his life, his home, his company. I remembered a specific skill I had, a technique for hand painting on silk that I had learned during a semester abroad in college. It was intricate, time-consuming, and created stunning, one-of-a-kind pieces. For years, I had used it to make birthday gifts for friends, or the occasional decorative pillow for our home. Richard had always called them charming little trinkets. "Scarves," I said, the idea crystallizing in my mind. "Luxury silk scarves, hand-painted, each one unique." Meredith's eyes lit up. "Perfect. It's a luxury item, high profit margin. You can start small, sell online, control the inventory. It's manageable. It's smart." She grabbed a pen. "It's a brand. What's the name?" "EVT Designs, for Eleanor Vance Thompson."
A final, private acknowledgement of the name I'm about to shed. The T will be silent, just like I was. Meredith smirked. I like it. It's got a little bit of poison in it. We spent the rest of the day hashing out the details, the startup costs, the suppliers. Meredith knew people, of course. She could get me the best silk from Italy, the finest dyes from France. She pulled out her Rolodex, a real physical Rolodex, she was old school like that, and started making calls. This is your story, Ellie, she said, her voice softer now after a long call in rapid-fire Italian. Every scarf will have a piece of you in it. We're not just building a business, we're building your new life. We're building your revenge. I looked at her, my oldest friend, and for the first time in 24 hours, I felt a genuine smile touch my lips. It's not about revenge, Mur, I corrected her gently. Revenge feels too small, too focused on him. This is bigger. This is about reclamation. She raised her whiskey glass. To reclamation, then. May it be swift, profitable, and utterly devastating to the enemy. I left New York the next day with a blueprint. I had a plan. I had a purpose. And for the first time in a very, very long time, I felt the thrill of possibility. The future was no longer a terrifying void. It was a blank canvas waiting for me to paint it. Returning to the large, silent house I once called home was strange. It felt like visiting a museum of my former life, a place where the exhibits were all behind velvet ropes. Every object, every piece of furniture I had so carefully chosen was a relic of a past that no longer belonged to me. Richard was on a business trip to Singapore for a week, which gave me the time I needed. I moved with a quiet efficiency, a woman on a mission, a ghost in my own house. My first step was to secure a workspace. I found a small, dusty studio for rent above a quiet bookstore on the edge of town. It wasn't much. The paint was peeling and the floors creaked, but it had huge north-facing windows that flooded the room with perfect indirect light. Most importantly, it was anonymous. The entrance was a discreet door at the side of the building. To cover my tracks, I concocted the perfect lie, one that would appeal to Richard's sense of superiority and his fundamental disinterest in my inner life. When he returned, jet-lagged and self-important, I told him I had decided to take up a new hobby. I've signed up for an art therapy class, I said, my voice carefully modulated to sound a little lost, a little sad. My therapist thought it would be good for me to, process things, get my hands dirty. Richard, feeling a pang of what he probably mistook for guilt, thought it was a wonderful idea. He was relieved. A hobby would keep me busy, keep me from bothering him with my feelings. That's great, Ellie. Really, you do that. He pulled out his wallet and handed me a thick wad of cash, $500. Here, go buy some clay or whatever you need. He saw it as a pittance to assuage his conscience, a cheap way to manage my grief. I saw it as seed money. His arrogance was now directly funding his own demise. I used his money to pay the first 3 months' rent on the studio and to buy my initial supplies. I spent a full day just cleaning the space, scrubbing the floors, painting the walls a clean, crisp white. The physical labor was cathartic, like I was washing away the grime of my old life. I set up my work tables, my dyes, my stretching frames. The place smelled of turpentine and fresh starts. It became my sanctuary, the one place in the world where I was no longer Mrs. Richard Thompson, but simply Eleanor. My first real test came a week later. In my eagerness to get started and my desire to stretch Richard's investment as far as possible, I made a rookie mistake, one that still makes me cringe. Meredith had given me the contact for a premier silk supplier in Como, Italy, a family-run business she'd worked with for years. Their prices were steep. Browsing online, I found another supplier, one that was based in China, whose prices were a fraction of the cost. I ignored Meredith's warnings about quality control. How different could it be, I thought. Silk is silk. It wasn't. When the package arrived, my heart sunk. The fabric that I pulled from the box was thin, flimsy, with a cheap synthetic sheen.
It felt rough to the touch, not the smooth, buttery texture of charmeuse. Still, I tried to be optimistic. Maybe it would soften after washing. I spent an entire day trying to salvage it. I washed a piece by hand and it came out stiff as cardboard. I tried applying the dye and the color bled unevenly, creating ugly, splotchy patches. The material puckered and warped when it dried. It was completely, utterly useless. I had spent nearly all of my startup capital on $1,000 worth of glorified rags.
I sat on the floor of my studio, surrounded by the ruined fabric, and the calm I had cultivated for weeks finally shattered. The weight of it all came crashing down on me. The humiliation, the uncertainty, the sheer, overwhelming magnitude of what I was trying to do. For a moment, I heard Richard's voice in my head, mocking me. Poor little thing, can't even buy the right fabric. Tears of frustration and despair pricked my eyes. I was a fool. I was in over my head. Maybe he was right. Maybe I couldn't do anything without him. I almost gave up right then. I almost packed everything up, went home, and accepted the quiet, comfortable life of a well-compensated divorcee he was offering me. I could spend my days gardening and playing tennis of the country club. It would be easy. It would be painless. It would be a living death. But then I thought of his face at that dinner table. I thought of the word acquaintance. The fury returned, a welcome, familiar fire that burned away the tears. I would not let him win. I would not let this stupid, costly mistake be the end of my story. Swallowing my pride, which felt like swallowing broken glass, I picked up the phone and called Meredith. "You were right," I said, the moment she answered. "The silk is garbage." There was a pause on the other end. I braced myself for an "I told you so." It never came. "Okay," Meredith said, her voice all business. "So, lesson learned. No more shortcuts. You get what you pay for. I'll call my guy in Como. I'll tell him you're my new partner and to give you my price. It'll still be expensive, but it'll be worth it. How are you for cash?" "I'm wiped out," I admitted. The words tasted like failure. "I spent it all on this trash." "I'll wire you $5,000, she said immediately, no hesitation. "Pay me back when you sell your first batch. This is an investment, Ellie. I'm investing in you." Her unwavering faith was the lifeline I needed. It was more than just money. It was a validation. Someone else believed in this crazy dream. After I hung up, I took all the cheap, ruined silk, stuffed it into a trash bag, and hauled it down to the dumpster behind the bookstore. As I let it go, I felt like I was throwing away more than just fabric. I was throwing away the part of me that doubted, the part that was still scared, the part that thought I needed to cut corners to succeed. I went back upstairs to my studio. The room was emptier now, but it felt cleaner, lighter. I had failed, and I had survived. This was the first real lesson of my new life. Failure wasn't the end, it was just the price of tuition. And I was determined to graduate with honors. With the proper materials on their way from Italy, thanks to Meredith's loan and connections, I adopted a new strategy: slow, smart, and silent. I knew I couldn't launch a splashy website or a major social media campaign. Any unusual online activity could be traced back to me. Richard was arrogant, but he wasn't stupid, and he had people who could track digital footprints. My anonymity was my greatest asset. So, I started small. I created a discreet, anonymous Instagram account under the brand name EVT Designs. I didn't use my name or show my face. The photos were artistic, focusing only on the luxurious folds of the silk, the vibrant, intricate patterns, the play of light on the fabric. The captions were simple, telling a small story about the inspiration behind each design: a sunset over the lake, the pattern of frost on a window pane, the colors of a forgotten garden. It was intimate and mysterious. My first sales channel wasn't online. It was old-fashioned and face-to-face. I found a high-end juried art market that took place on the first weekend of every month in a wealthy town about an hour away, a place where no one would know me. It was a place where people came to spend serious money on unique, handcrafted items. It was the perfect place to test my product and my pricing. The first time I set up my booth, my hands were shaking. I arranged my scarves on velvet busts, each one a small masterpiece. I felt incredibly exposed, vulnerable. What if no one liked them? What if they just walked by? What if my price point was ridiculously high? For the first hour, they did just walk by. People would glance over, murmur something to their companion, and move on. The old voice of doubt started to creep back in. But then a woman stopped. She was elegant, probably in her late 60s, with an air of quiet confidence. She didn't speak at first, just reached out a hand to touch one of the scarves, a swirl of deep blues and silver. "The silk is exquisite," she said, her voice a low murmur. "Is this hand-painted?" "Yes, it is," I replied, my voice a little shaky. She examined the piece for a long time, her fingers tracing the delicate lines of the design. "It feels like a memory," she said, more to herself than to me. "I'll take it." She paid the full price, $400, without blinking. As I carefully wrapped it in tissue paper and placed it in a simple, elegant black box, she looked me in the eye. "You have a true gift, my dear. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise." That one sale, that one comment, was like a shot of adrenaline to my soul. Over the rest of the weekend, I sold 5 more scarves. I went home with over $2,000 in cash and something far more valuable. Proof of concept. My work had value. Strangers were willing to pay for it. I continued this pattern for months. I'd spend the weekdays in my studio, painting, creating, living a secret life. On the weekends, I'd drive to the market. At home, I continued to play the part of the sad, leaseless wife attending Richard's corporate functions with a placid smile. These events were torture, but they were also a rich source of intelligence. And one evening, they provided an unexpected opportunity. It was a cocktail party for Richard's company's investors at a sleek downtown hotel. I was wearing one of my own scarves, a bold design of crimson and gold tucked into the collar of a simple black dress. I was standing by the bar, trying to look inconspicuous, when a woman approached me. It was Sarah, the company's sharp, ambitious director of marketing. I knew she was brilliant. I'd secretly reviewed her proposals for years, often giving Richard notes to pass on to her as his own. "Eleanor," she said, her eyes fixed on my scarf, "that is an absolutely stunning piece. Where on earth did you get it?" I gave my practiced, demure smile. "Oh, this? It was just a gift." Sarah was not easily fooled. She leaned in closer, her expression one of genuine admiration mixed with a shrewd, analytical curiosity. "A gift from a very talented designer, then. That's not just a scarf. That's a statement piece. The color story, the line work, it's incredible." She paused, holding my gaze. "I'm serious, Eleanor. That piece has a point of view. It has a brand identity, even if it's just one piece. If you ever find out where it came from, or if the designer decides to sell them, you have my card. I would be their first customer." She pressed her business card into my hand. The interaction was brief, but it was a significant moment. Sarah hadn't just seen a pretty accessory. She had seen branding, marketability, a product. She saw what Richard, in 20 years, had never been able to see. I slipped the card into my purse, a small, hard rectangle of validation.
I didn't know it then, but I had just gained my first unwitting ally from deep inside the enemy camp. The silent steps were getting louder. I was building a quiet momentum, a secret current flowing beneath the surface of my placid, carefully curated life. And no one, least of all the man I still shared a roof with, had any idea the tide was about to turn. The most terrifying moment of my entire 18-month endeavor happened on a rainy Tuesday afternoon in October. It was the day my carefully constructed double life almost came crashing down around me, the day I learned the true meaning of panic. I was in my studio, deeply focused. The scent of dye and hot wax hung in the air. Music was playing softly from a small speaker in the corner, some melancholic piano piece that helped me concentrate. I had a large, intricate piece stretched on the frame, a complex design that required my full attention. It was a commission for a client in California, my biggest one to date. My phone was on silent, tucked away in my bag. I was in my element, completely lost in the flow of creation, a world away from the lies and the tension of my other life. That's why I didn't see the first text message, or the second. It was a frantic message from Mr. Henderson, the elderly, kind-hearted man who owned the bookstore downstairs. "Eleanor, your husband is here. He's downstairs asking for you. Said he wanted to surprise you." My blood ran cold. I scrambled for my phone and saw the messages, sent 10 minutes apart. The second one was even more alarming. "He's getting impatient. He's coming up." Panic, cold and sharp, seized me. It was a physical sensation, a jolt of ice water through my veins. I looked around the studio. It wasn't a hobbyist's workspace. It was a professional design studio. There were bolts of silk, jars of professional-grade dyes, shipping boxes from my Italian supplier stacked in a corner, completed scarves hanging to dry, and my laptop open to my business's financial spreadsheet showing a healthy 5-figure balance. It was a room full of evidence, a confession in physical form. I had maybe 90 seconds. My mind, which felt like it was short-circuiting, sharpened by months of clandestine planning, kicked into high gear. I moved with a speed I didn't know I possessed. The expensive, half-finished scarf on the frame was the biggest problem. It was a masterpiece in progress, the culmination of a week's work. I couldn't hide it. So I did the only thing I could think of. I ruined it. With a sob catching in my throat, I grabbed a jar of black dye and deliberately tipped it over the center of the design, creating a huge, ugly blotch that looked like a weeping wound. It was a painful sacrifice, a financial and emotional blow, but a necessary one. Next, the shipping boxes. I shoved them into a deep closet, throwing an old dusty tarp over them. The jars of dye went into a large bin hidden under a pile of rags. The hanging scarves were frantically pulled down and stuffed into a large black portfolio case, which I slid under a low workbench. I slammed my laptop shut and shoved it in my bag. The only things left out were a few blank canvases I kept for show, a set of cheap acrylic paints I'd never opened, and the now ruined silk on the frame. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might break free. I took a deep breath, smudged a bit of paint on my cheek for effect, and tried to look like a frustrated artist, not a terrified entrepreneur on the verge of being exposed. I heard his heavy footsteps on the stairs just as I sat down on a stool, staring mournfully at my ruined artwork. The door creaked open. "Ellie?" Richard called out. He stepped inside, bringing the smell of rain and his expensive cologne into my sanctuary. He was holding a bouquet of flowers, a gesture so rare it was immediately suspicious. He was on a charm offensive, probably feeling a flicker of guilt about his increasingly frequent late nights at the office. His eyes swept the room. I held my breath, waiting for him to notice something was wrong, for his sharp, analytical mind to see past my flimsy deception. I waited for him to ask why a pottery student was working with silk, or where the kiln was. He didn't. His gaze landed on me, then on the black-stained silk. "Whoa," he said, a small smirk playing on his lips. "Looks like someone had a little accident." I managed a weak, watery smile, a performance worthy of an Oscar. It's not going well today," I mumbled, gesturing to the ruined piece. "I think I'm just not very good at this." He walked over, his expensive leather shoes echoing on the wooden floor. He glanced around the room at the bare-bones setup I had so frantically created. He saw the cheap canvases, the scattered, unused brushes. He saw exactly what I wanted him to see. A sad, bored housewife dabbling in a pathetic little hobby to pass the time. "Oh, Ellie," he said, his voice dripping with the condescending pity that I had come to despise. He patted my shoulder. "It's just a hobby. It doesn't have to be perfect. The point is that it keeps you busy, right?" He set the flowers down on a table, their bright colors looking garish and out of place in my functional workspace. "Well," he said, clearly bored already, "I just wanted to surprise you. I've got a dinner meeting, so I can't stay." He gave the room one last dismissive glance. "It's a cute little setup you've got here. Real cute." And then he was gone. I sat there for a full 10 minutes after he left, my body trembling with the leftover adrenaline. He had been standing in the heart of my secret empire, And he had seen nothing. He was so blinded by his own perception of me as a helpless, untalented dependent that he couldn't see the truth even when it was right in front of him. His condescension had always been my prison. In that moment, I realized it was also my greatest weapon. It was the perfect camouflage. He would never see me coming, because in his world, I wasn't even in the race. The fear slowly subsided, replaced by an ice-cold resolve. I took the ruined scarf off the frame, folded it, and put it away in a special box. It was a reminder of how close I had come to losing everything, and a reminder of the incredible power that comes from being chronically, systematically underestimated. For over a year, my life was a carefully balanced act of deception. I was two different people, living in two different worlds. There was the Eleanor who ran EVT Designs, a growing, profitable business built on silent steps and secret successes. And there was Eleanor Thompson, the quiet, subdued wife of a tech CEO, a woman who spent her days at art therapy. The strain of maintaining this duality was immense, but the progress of my secret life was the fuel that kept me going. The real breakthrough, the moment that changed everything, didn't come from my own efforts. It came, as these things often do, from a mixture of luck and the unpredictable nature of the digital world. I had sold one of my most ambitious pieces, a scarf I called Winter's Thaw, to a wealthy client through my Instagram account. A month later, I was scrolling through my phone during a boring charity luncheon Richard had insisted I attend when I saw it. A picture from a red carpet event in Los Angeles. A famous Oscar-winning actress, known for her impeccable and adventurous taste, was wearing it. She had draped my scarf over a simple, elegant black gown. It wasn't just an accessory. It was the centerpiece of her entire look.
My heart stopped. I zoomed in. There was no mistaking it. It was my design, my brushstrokes, my soul on display for the world to see. The photo had been taken by a Getty photographer and was being picked up by fashion blogs everywhere. But the real explosion happened when a sharp-eyed senior editor at Vogue noticed it. She didn't know the brand, so she posted a cropped photo of the scarf on the magazine's influential Instagram story with the caption, "ID on this stunning hand-painted silk? A masterpiece." The internet did its work. Within hours, my anonymous little Instagram account was flooded. Followers, comments, DMs. The editor found me, tagged EVT Designs in a follow-up post, and my world tilted on its axis. My phone buzzed incessantly. The email account I had set up for the business, which usually received a few orders a day, was now receiving hundreds per hour. My entire inventory sold out in less than a day. It was exhilarating and terrifying. I had to shut down the online store to stop the flood of orders I couldn't possibly fulfill. Most of the emails were from frantic customers or small boutiques wanting to carry my line. But there was one email that was different. The subject line was simple: introduction and inquiry. It wasn't from a fashion house or a retailer. It was from a boutique venture capital firm called Artisan Growth Partners, a group known for finding small, high-potential luxury brands and turning them into global powerhouses. The email was brief and professional. It was written by a partner at the firm. He said he had been following my brand for a few months, impressed by my strong brand identity and clear market potential. The recent publicity had simply accelerated their timeline. They weren't interested in buying a few scarves. They saw the potential for a full lifestyle brand: handbags, home goods, a ready-to-wear line. They wanted to talk about an investment, a significant one. This was the moment. This was the crossroads. I could continue as I was, a successful but small artisan, or I could take the leap and become a real player. I knew I couldn't do it alone. The first person I called was Meredith. The second was a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but the best, most ruthless matrimonial and business lawyer I could find, a woman named Anya Sharma. I had been researching her for months. Her reputation preceded her. She was brilliant, tough, and specialized in cases with complex financial assets. The next few months were a blur of secret meetings.
I'd tell Richard I was going on a wellness retreat or visiting a sick aunt. Instead, I was flying to New York for clandestine meetings in sterile boardrooms with Anya and the team from Artisan Growth Partners. The due diligence process was intense. They scrutinized every aspect of my small business, my sales figures, my profit margins, my production methods, my vision for the future. I had to present my work, my soul, to a room of stone-faced financiers. The first meeting was brutal. A particularly skeptical partner, a man named Sterling, grilled me relentlessly. "Ms. Vance," he'd said, peering at me over his glasses, "you've done well in a niche market. But what makes you think you can scale this? What's to stop a major brand from knocking off your designs and selling them for a tenth of the price?" Anya had prepped me for this. "Mr. Sterling," I replied, my voice steady, "they can knock off a pattern, but they can't knock off a story. They can't replicate the authenticity of a hand-painted piece. My brand isn't just about a product. It's about artistry, exclusivity, and the story of its creation. That's something that cannot be mass-produced." Anya was my rock. She was a master strategist, anticipating every question, structuring every deal point. She saw the divorce and the business investment not as two separate events, but as a single, coordinated campaign. "We don't file for divorce until the ink is dry on the investment," she had instructed. "We control the timing, we control the narrative." Finally, the day came. We were in Anya's office overlooking the city. The lead partner from the VC firm slid a document across the table. It was a signed letter of intent. They were offering a $32 million capital injection in exchange for a 40% stake in EVT Designs. I stared at the number, my hands trembling slightly. The offer wasn't just for the company as it was for the company they believed I could build. They weren't buying my past, they were investing in my future. The valuation of my little hobby, the company I had built in secret from the ashes of my marriage, was $80 million. Anya looked at me, a rare, small smile on her lips. "Well, Eleanor, I believe we now have everything we need for your divorce proceedings." The day of the hearing, I chose my armor with care, a simple, impeccably tailored sheath dress in a deep charcoal gray. No jewelry, except for my late mother's simple gold watch, its quiet ticking a reminder of the passage of time and the strength of the women who came before me. And in my hand, the leather briefcase, my first prototype. It felt like holding a shield. When Anya and I walked into the courtroom, the atmosphere was exactly as I had anticipated. Richard and his lawyer, Davis, were relaxed, confident. They looked at us like we were a minor annoyance, a piece of paperwork to be dealt with before they could get to their important lunch reservations. Their smugness was a tangible thing, filling the space around their polished oak table. The proceedings began, and Davis laid out their offer with the air of a king bestowing a great favor. The pittance of an alimony, the vacation house he no longer used. He painted a picture of Richard as a wronged but benevolent wan, and me as a helpless woman who should be grateful for any crumbs thrown her way. He even had the audacity to mention my emotional instability as a reason for the marriage's failure, citing my need for art therapy. The judge, a weary-looking man named Miller who looked like he had seen it all, listened with a practiced patience. When Davis was finished, Judge Miller turned his tired eyes to our table. "Ms. Sharma, your response?" Anya stood up, her movements fluid and deliberate. She was the picture of calm professionalism. "Thank you, Your Honor," she began, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the stuffy air. "My client, Mrs. Vance, wishes to respectfully decline Mr. Thompson's offer." A flicker of annoyance crossed Davis's face. Richard shifted in his seat, a small, arrogant smile playing on his lips as if this was a cute but futile act of defiance. "In fact, Your Honor, my client will not be seeking any alimony whatsoever. She has no need for Mr. Thompson's financial support." Now Richard's smile faltered. He looked genuinely confused. This was not part of his script. Davis whispered something to him, and Richard shook his head, waving a dismissive hand. Anya walked towards the judge's bench carrying a set of thick, bound documents.
This, Your Honor, is the financial statement for EVT Designs, LLC, a company wholly owned by my client, Eleanor Vance.
Richard let out a short, incredulous laugh. EVT Designs, he whispered to Davies, loud enough for me to hear. That's her little arts and crafts project. What did she make, a few $1,000s? This is a waste of the court's time. Anya continued as if he hadn't spoken. As you can see from the certified P&L statement, in the last fiscal year, EVT Designs had a gross revenue of $4.2 million, with a net profit of $2.8 million. The courtroom fell silent. So silent I could hear the faint hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. I watched Richard's face. The color drained from it, leaving a pasty, grayish pallor. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. Davies was staring at the document in his hand as if it were written in a foreign language, his slick confidence evaporating like mist. But Anya wasn't finished. She was a master of timing, of building to a crescendo. That number, however, does not represent the company's full value, she said, her voice resonating with authority. She placed a second document on the judge's bench. This, Your Honor, is a letter of intent, signed and executed last week. It is from Artisan Growth Partners, a venture capital firm specializing in luxury brands. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in the room. They have conducted a thorough 3-month due diligence process, and based on their findings, they have offered a capital injection of $32 million for a 40% stake in the company. She turned slightly, her gaze sweeping over Richard and his lawyer before landing back on the judge. This isn't revenue, Your Honor. This is a professional valuation of the company's intellectual property, brand equity, and growth potential. It puts the current conservative valuation of Mrs. Vance's arts and crafts project at $80 million. The silence that followed was different. It was heavy, profound. It was the sound of a world being turned upside down. Judge Miller, who had been leaning back in his chair, slowly sat forward. He picked up the document, put on his reading glasses, and read it. Then he read it again. He looked up from the paper over his glasses, first at a shell-shocked Richard, then at Anya, and finally at me. For the first time that day, he looked at me not as another sad divorcee, but as a person of substance. The weariness was gone from his eyes, replaced by a look of grudging respect. I, in turn, looked at my husband, the man who had called me a hobbyist, the man who erased me, the man who at that very moment looked smaller and more insignificant than I had ever seen him in my life. The power in the room had not just shifted, it had caused a tectonic rupture, and the ground beneath Richard Thompson's feet had just crumbled into dust. The judge called for a 30-minute recess. The sharp rap of his gavel echoed in the stunned silence of the courtroom, a sound that signaled the end of one reality and the beginning of another. Anya gave my shoulder a light, reassuring squeeze before gathering her papers with methodical calm. I stood up, my legs feeling surprisingly steady. As we made our way toward the exit, Richard scrambled from his table, his face a mask of disbelief and panic. His lawyer, Davis, looked utterly defeated, slumping in his chair like a puppet with its strings cut, muttering to himself. "Ellie!" Richard's voice was hoarse, desperate. He hurried to intercept me in the hallway just outside the courtroom doors. The corridor was empty, a sterile beige tunnel that suddenly felt like an arena. "Ellie, we need to talk," he said, reaching for my arm. I instinctively pulled back, and his hand fell away, limp and useless. He looked terrible. The confident, smug CEO was gone, replaced by a frantic, pleading stranger. His eyes, which had always held a glint of dismissive amusement when he looked at me, were now wide with terror I recognized. The terror of a man who has just realized he has fundamentally, catastrophically miscalculated.
80 million, he whispered, the number sounding absurd on his lips. How? I don't understand. The scarves? The little things you made in the guest room? No, I said, my voice quiet but firm. You don't. You never did. Listen, he said, his tone shifting, trying to regain some semblance of control. He attempted a smile, but it was a grotesque twitch of his lips. Okay, I was a fool. I admit it. I'm a complete idiot. I never saw this in you. He ran a hand through his perfect hair, messing it up for the first time I could remember. He tried a different tactic. Nostalgia. Ellie, remember our first apartment? How you painted that mural on the wall because we couldn't afford art? You've always been brilliant. I always knew it. I got lost in the corporate nonsense. It changes a man. I said nothing. I just watched him, my silence a mirror reflecting his desperation back at him. He switched to guilt. I know I messed up. With Chloe, it was a mistake. A stupid, meaningless mistake. She means nothing to me. You and I, we have history, 20 years. You can't just throw that away. When that didn't work, he finally landed on the only language he truly understood. He took a step closer, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper, the way he used to when he was about to share a brilliant business idea. But think about this, Ellie. Just think. This changes everything. We can fix this. We can withdraw the divorce petition. Think of the power we could have together. Thompson and Vance, my tech and your empire. We could be unstoppable, a true power couple. We'll be on the cover of Forbes. I stared at him, and in that moment, all the lingering ghosts of affection, all the residual pain, all of it vanished, burned away by the sheer unadulterated audacity of his words. He wasn't apologizing for the pain, the betrayal, the years of belittling me. He wasn't seeing me, the woman he had promised to love and cherish. He was seeing a business opportunity. He was looking at an asset he had foolishly undervalued and was now trying to reacquire at a bargain price. He wasn't asking for forgiveness, he was proposing a merger. A slow, cold clarity washed over me. I finally understood the deepest truth about him. He was incapable of seeing people, including me, as anything other than resources to be exploited for his own gain. I looked him directly in the eye. My voice, when I spoke, was devoid of heat or anger. It was as calm and as deep as a frozen lake. Power? I repeated his word, letting it hang in the air between us. No, Richard, you're not seeing power. You're seeing a lifeboat. He flinched, a flicker of confusion in his panicked eyes. Your ship is sinking, Richard, I continued, my voice never rising. You've just realized you're on a sinking ship and you're looking at me, thinking I can save you. You want to lash your crumbling vessel to my new one. I took a step closer until we were almost touching. I could smell the faint scent of his fear, a sour note under his expensive cologne. But I am not your harbor anymore, I said, each word precise and deliberate. I am not your lifeboat. I paused, holding his gaze, letting him see the absolute finality in my eyes. I am the ocean, and I will drown anyone who dares to underestimate me again. His face crumpled. The desperation, the panic, the false bravado, it all collapsed, leaving behind the hollowed-out shell of a man. For the first time, I think he truly understood that he had not just lost a wife or a business opportunity, he had lost something irretrievable. He had lost the game, a game he never even knew he was playing.
Without another word, I turned my back on him and walked away down the long, empty hallway, the sound of my heels clicking with a steady, rhythmic purpose. Anya was waiting for me at the far end, a silent, approving sentinel. I didn't look back. There was nothing left to see. The real victory hadn't been the $80 million valuation. It was this moment of absolute, untainted liberation.
The world moves fast when money and humiliation are involved. News of the courtroom showdown didn't just stay within the baize walls of the family court. It leaked. I suspect Anya's office may have given it a discreet push to a friendly journalist, but the story was too good to stay quiet for long. Within a week, a small article appeared in a local business journal, then a bigger one in a national publication. The narrative was irresistible. The tech CEO's overlooked wife who secretly builds a fashion empire. The stories were careful not to mention the divorce details, focusing instead on the stunning valuation of EVT designs and the venture capital deal. But anyone with an ounce of sense could read between the lines. The fallout for Richard was immediate and brutal. His investors, the same men who had chuckled when he called me his home fire, were not laughing now. They started asking questions. Hard questions. If their CEO could be so spectacularly wrong about the person he shared his life with for 20 years, what other massive blind spots did he have? What other opportunities had he missed? What other risks was he ignoring? His judgment, once seen as his greatest asset, was now his greatest liability. But the most significant blow didn't come from his investors. It came from within his own company. It came from Sarah. Sarah, the sharp-eyed marketing director who had admired my scarf all those months ago, had been watching Richard's behavior for years. She had seen my uncredited contributions. She had experienced his dismissive attitude toward the women on his team firsthand. My story was not a surprise to her. It was a confirmation. And for her, it was a catalyst. She didn't just quit. That would have been too simple, too quiet. Sarah was a strategist just like me. She organized a secret meeting one evening at a wine bar far from the office. She invited 4 other senior female employees at the company, the head of HR, the lead software architect, the VP of sales, and a top project manager. I learned about this later from Sarah herself. She laid out the newspaper article on the table. She said, "This is what happens when you underestimate a woman. But Eleanor had to leave to build her own kingdom. What if we didn't have to leave? What if we just took over?" It was a radical idea, but the women around the table were ready for it. They shared their own stories of being overlooked, of having their ideas stolen, of being passed over for promotions in favor of less qualified men. There was a well of shared frustration and righteous anger in that room. My story, the story of what I had built after being cast aside, became their rallying cry. It gave them the courage to do what they had all been dreaming of doing for years. They didn't want to leave. They wanted to fix the broken system. Their plan was brilliant. They drafted a formal proposal to the board of directors, a detailed plan for a corporate restructuring. It outlined a new leadership initiative focused on diversity and inclusion, a mentorship program for female employees, and a transparent review process for promotions and salary increases. At the end of the proposal was their ultimatum: implement these changes and promote Sarah to a newly created role of Chief Strategy Officer, or all 5 of them would walk, and they would make the press know exactly why. It was a masterclass in corporate warfare. The board, already reeling from the bad press and the plunging stock price, was cornered. Losing 5 of their most critical senior leaders at once would be a death blow. They had no choice. The following Monday morning, the company announced a major corporate restructuring, and Sarah was promoted. Richard was sidelined. He kept his CEO title for a few more months, but he was a king without a crown, a leader no one followed. His power had been effectively neutralized, not by an outside force, but by the very people he had taken for granted. His fallout wasn't a single event, but a slow, public crumbling, triggered not by my victory, but by the collective power of the women I had unknowingly inspired. I watched it all from a distance, from the quiet of my studio. I felt no joy in his destruction, no sense of vindictive pleasure. His fate was his own making. My focus was elsewhere. It was on the future, on building my company, on fulfilling the promise I had made to myself. My victory wasn't about tearing him down. It was about building myself up, and in doing so, showing other women how to find the tools to build their own empires, whatever they might be. A year can change
everything. 1 year after that fateful day in court, I was not in Paris, as the fashion magazines might have you believe. I was in a large, light-filled loft space in New York's garment district. The air smelled of new beginnings, fresh paint, and the rich, earthy scent of Italian silk. This was the new headquarters of EVT Designs. I had made a counteroffer to the venture capital firm. I didn't want a full acquisition. I didn't want to be an employee in the company I had bled for. I negotiated a partnership, one that gave me the capital to expand, but left me with majority ownership and complete creative control. They had been so impressed by my nerve and my vision that they agreed. The space was bustling with energy. Young designers sketched at large white tables, pattern makers draped fabric on mannequins, and the logistics team managed shipments to high-end boutiques around the world. It was a living, breathing organism, born from a secret whispered in a dusty studio. I made sure my employees had the best benefits, fair pay, and a voice that was always heard. I was building the kind of company I had always wished I could work for. I was in my office, a glass-walled space overlooking the main floor, reviewing designs for our first handbag collection, when my assistant brought in a package. It was a simple brown box with no return address. Curious, I slid it open with a palette knife. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a simple silver picture frame, and in the frame was a photograph. It was a picture of 5 smiling women clinking champagne glasses in a bright, modern office. I recognized them immediately. It was Sarah and the other 5 women who had walked out of Richard's company. They looked happy, energized, free. Tucked behind the photo was a small, handwritten note on thick cardstock. It read, "Eleanor, we wanted you to have the first picture taken in our new office. We didn't end up staying at Innovectech. After 6 months, we realized it was better to build something new than to fix something rotten. We started our own firm. It felt fitting. Thank you for showing us the way. Thank you for reminding us that the best revenge isn't getting angry. It's getting everything. Yours, Sarah." I held the frame in my hands, a lump forming in my throat. I traced the edge of the photo with my finger, looking at their triumphant faces. In the years since the divorce, I hadn't thought much about Richard. I'd heard through the grapevine that he'd been forced to step down as CEO, his reputation in tatters. His company was sold for parts, a shadow of its former self. His story was a cautionary tale told in business schools. Chloe had left him, his money and power gone. His downfall was complete.
But as I looked at this picture, I realized that his failure was utterly irrelevant to my success. My story was never truly about him. It was about this. It was about the unexpected ripple effects of one woman deciding she was worth more. I had started this journey to reclaim my own life, to build something for myself. But along the way, my small act of rebellion had become a beacon for others. My fire had lit other fires. I looked out through the glass walls of my office at the company I had built. I saw the young women on my team, collaborating, creating, their voices heard, their talents celebrated. I saw Meredith, who had joined me as Chief Operating Officer, laughing with a supplier on the phone. This was my real achievement. This was my real empire. My name is Eleanor Vance. I am 49 years old now, and I've learned that a person's true legacy isn't measured in dollars or stock prices. It's not about the things you acquire. It's about the passion you ignite in others. The real inheritance you leave behind is the inspiration for someone else to begin their own story. Thank you for listening to mine. I hope it gives you strength, no matter what you're facing. Please keep sharing your own stories in the comments. I'm reading every single one.